Hey there gamers, welcome back to the Board Game Co channel, and this is a preview of Apophenia Horror Hunt. Well, hey there gamers, it's Professor Meg here, and welcome back to the Board Game Co channel. Today we have a preview of Apophenia Horror Hunt. Thank you to Cybergoat Studios for sponsoring this video, and with that in mind, this is a prototype copy in front of me, so all of the rules, components, things like that are subject to change, but this is a current Kickstarter. You can check out the link down below to see everything that they have planned. But with that, we are going to go over the premise of the game, which is going to be trying to fight off these different horrors. But the only way that you're going to be able to fight off these horrors are going to be by acquiring the items that are able to stop that particular horror, such as a werewolf needing something silver to be able to stop them. But the only way you're going to find those items is if you have the right locations to be able to search in. So the entire point of this game is going to be building out a map where players are going to be cooperatively playing out these different rooms, which will spawn different items within them, all hopefully able to stop the different horror that players are fighting against, because this is a deduction game. There are 4 types of horrors throughout the game, and you know that you are playing with one of each type when you start, and the one at the very bottom is the one that you are actually fighting against. So you are able to reveal some information throughout the game by looking at these top 3 cards when triggered, but eventually the bottom card, which is the horror that you are fighting against, will be unveiled. It will have an unveil ability, and then hopefully you will be able to vanquish the horror and save everyone. Now, that being said, some of these horrors will turn players to their bad side, and they will become corrupted players. Now, if that happens, those players may need to be vanquished. They might be providing some subterfuge throughout the game and stopping players from doing certain things and acting in best interest of the horror. So that can happen once a player is attacked, but beyond that, all players are going to be working together to try to stop this horror. Now, throughout the game, players are going to have 3 different decks that they are concerned about. So the first deck is that horror deck, where the only card they really need to worry about is the very bottom one, and this one will never be shuffled, that won't change. But there is also the item deck, which will be spawned out along the board within different locations, and those locations are all going to come from this event deck. Now, the event deck has locations in them, but they also have different actions, and on top of that, they have encounter cards in that deck. These encounter cards mean that players are going to be directly interacting with the horror that is set up for the game, and when that happens, that player is going to look at the horror, see exactly what they are. This one is a werewolf. They're going to attack, and then whatever happens, happens. When you are attacked, you are able to try to stop the attack, but an example for the werewolf is if you survive the attack, even if you survive, unless the horror is unveiled, you become a werewolf and change sides. So we'll go over a lot more of that in detail in a moment, but that's something that can happen throughout the game, that you can see where a player may become the other side and may even need to be vanquished in order for players to win. Now, these encounter cards are shuffled into the event deck, and once they happen, they are shuffled back in. So currently, for the difficulty level for this game, there are 2 encounter cards shuffled into this current event deck, and once they are drawn, the players are going to have to deal with this and then also shuffle it back in, meaning that it is going to become more and more likely that players will interact with this as event cards are drawn. Now, before we go through the phases of a turn and what that looks like, I'm going to go through the actions that you're able to take, because I think the actions are going to make the phases make a lot more sense. Now, throughout the game, there are special actions and core actions, and for the core actions, you're able to take all of them once, but if you discard a card from your hand, you're able to take additional core actions. So you can do that same action additional times, such as moving once and then moving again if you discard a card from your hand. So the core actions that you're able to do is, as you are drawing event cards, as long as they are an encounter or something that you have to trigger immediately, you're able to stockpile these cards into your hand. Now, you're going to have different locations as well as different passageways, and during your turn, you're able to place either of those depending on the restrictions. So you're able to place certain rooms next to each other because it just makes sense, like the living room next to the dining room, but if you want to connect certain areas, such as like the woods to the attic, you need to put connecting areas that will do that, such as a door, window, things like that. So you can place those passageways, but then after that, another core action is going to be how you open those. So they're going to start off locked and you're going to have to open them. In order to do that, you can either play a card that is a key, discard 2 cards, or use an attack action to just break it open. Now, additionally, as I said, another core action is moving around the board. And then finally, you're also able to obtain an item. So when an area is played, such as this living room here, it spawns a certain number of item cards. And when a player is in that room, they're able to look at those item cards. And then if they choose to do so, they can obtain an item by discarding a card and then drawing a card available. Now, for our blue player, we do have this handgun here, which repels shapeshifters and undead, meaning that you have a 50-50 shot of being able to repel something that is in the enemy deck. Now, that is something that's going to be able to help save your life, so taking this handgun isn't a bad idea for that blue player. But these items would stay here until you are able to take that action, and then you would discard a card to take one of the item cards, knowing what else is there and available. Now, for the special actions, as I said, you are able to discard a card to regain any of the core actions and do them again. You're also able to use a card from your hand or an area ability. So different areas will have abilities, such as our kitchen here, which is interact with this area and then discard one card to get the garlic or the salt from the discard pile. So you would be able to interact with this area, which we'll get into what that means in a second, but as you can see, that's a way for you to get certain things from the discard pile that may have been very useful to other players in stopping the horror that was coming against you to hopefully save your life. Now, interact is the next thing that I'd like to talk about, and you can either interact with a particular area or with another player. Now, when you interact with the area, you discard a card and draw an event card, so that would be a way for you to move through the different event cards, perhaps getting rid of some areas that aren't quite as useful, trying to get to what you really think you need. And then you're also able to interact with a player, which is passing a card to a player in range to either draw an event card or have that player pass a card from their hand back to you. So you have to be within range. For example, our orange and purple player would be able to interact together here in this spot. And when you do so, the purple player, for example, if it was their turn, they would have to send a card over to the orange player, but then the orange player would have a choice of either to send a card back to them, and if they decide not to, then the purple player would draw an event card. So now to go through the different phases of the game, at the start of your turn, you're going to have a starting phase where anything would trigger if you have something that has an ability that would do so, and then the next thing you would do is pick up any of those cards that were passed to you during the interact phase. Now, if a player has turned to the horror side, they are now corrupted, and they might send you something pretty bad. You're also able to attack other players and send strikes to them, so that may happen. And then after that, you draw those cards as well as an event card for your turn. That's how the event cards come into play, is that every player will draw one, and then after that you will resolve those cards. So you don't have to resolve any cards in your hand that are event cards that are normal ones, such as the passageways and the rooms, but if you have a strike or an encounter, you do have to resolve it, and then you'll find out what's attacking you and see if you can survive. Now, after that, players will be able to take their actions, so they'll be able to do the different actions that they would like to do for the turn, but after that there is a mandatory check that if you did not interact with your particular area, if you are in the same area as another player, you are forced to interact with them, and then the round will end. So now let's talk a bit about when the horror attacks you, because we talked about how you would become a werewolf yourself, but we didn't really talk about how to stop these attacks. So for the werewolf, you do have the silver dagger, and this is what's going to ultimately win in the game. This is how you're going to vanquish them, and this is what players are searching for once they know that the werewolf is their target. So this is extremely important. But when something like that attacks you, if you have an item in your hand, such as something like this handgun, you would be able to repel the shapeshifter. So you would be able to play something like this to be able to repel them instead, which would be able to stop them but not necessarily vanquish them to win the game. But alternatively, you are able to discard 2 cards from your hand instead to survive the attack. Now, again, with this werewolf, if you survive the attack, you just become a corrupted side instead. You switch sides, and now you have to be vanquished. But that being said, since this is the deck of 4 cards, every time a player dies, one of these cards will be unveiled, showing that you are no longer worried about trying to stop spirits, and then etc. You'll go through this, that eventually, if you are ever at a point where you have perfect information, for example, if all players have been attacked by the horror, if you're only playing a 2-player game and they've both seen it very quickly, you would immediately unveil it. Or if you have ultimately seen all of the other cards, you would also flip this over to its unveil side. And that's because the werewolf also has an unveil ability, and that's going to make it a bit stronger as well. Now this werewolf is particularly chunky, and this makes him a lot stronger, where strikes cannot be used against this horror. You need to use an attack with the silver dagger to be able to vanquish him, and now you are not able to use strikes against him. If a player draws an encounter and is not killed or does not vanquish this horror, pass it in turn order to other hunters located up to 2 areas away, meaning that the werewolf is going to continue to attack even up to 2 areas away, and a werewolf player may move 2 areas at a time and may attack anyone by discarding 3 cards, so it also makes the werewolf players even more strong. Now, players will also die throughout the game. That can absolutely happen. And when a player dies, they can do a lot less throughout the game. They're not really able to interact or move, but they are able to draw event cards. And if another player chooses to interact with them, they're able to trade cards with those players to hopefully help them, or perhaps stop the werewolf players if they know what they can hand them is something a little bit more detrimental to their plan. Now, these dead players also get 2 abilities that they're able to use each of these once by the end of the game, and one of them is Last Will, which they're able to give one of their cards in their hand to any other player. Now, they will still draw event cards on their turn, so this could be very, very helpful. And they're also able to sign, which is place one area or passage anywhere on the field, and that would then give other players somewhere else to interact with and spawn even more item cards, allowing them to be able to hopefully mill through and find what they need to be able to stop the horror. Apophenia Horror Hunt is going to be a quick-paced deduction game that is semi-cooperative, where players are going to be able to work together to try to place out these locations pretty strategically, spread them out, and then get these items out as quickly as possible because they are your best defense against the different horrors. Now, the deduction element has a lot of replayability to it because all the horrors that you interact with are very, very unique and different, and they'll change the game a lot for you depending on who you're playing with. But that being said, you are only ever actually fighting against 1 per game, so there's a lot of replayability there with the different horrors that you'll be encountering. Thank you to CyberGoat Studios for sponsoring this video. You can check out the link down below for their current project and everything that they have planned. Thank you all for watching the Board Game Code channel. I've been Professor Meg, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!